Anabar Plateau, an ancient little-known mountainous country. This is a lost world far in the north of central Siberia. Audiences may already know a few things about the incredible Putaran Plateau. However, few people know the Anabar Plateau, which is located next to it. From the north is the tundra, from the south is the boundless taiga or boreal forest, from the west is the Putaran Plateau. This territory is part of the Thymir district of the Krasnoyarsk territory and Yukantia. Some of the most mysterious areas of Russia's north and its Arctic lands of ancient radioactive cauldrons, tales of ancient aliens, ancient iron fish lurking in the waters, and ubiquitous UFOs hovering over frozen territories for millennia. But the two plateaus, they're special in their own ways. The Anabar Plateau is absolutely an ideal wilderness. Here, the clean air of the early morning flows into the body with coolness. There are not so many places left on Earth that are completely untouched by human activity. There are no roads, no people, or settlements for hundreds of kilometers. Here, in the undivided and boundless silence of the surrounding space, you can hear how the blood pulsates through the vessels and how thoughts fly through your head. The Anabar Plateau is called an open-air museum of the geological history of the Earth. It has stones, water and sparse vegetation, deer, wolves, hares, whitefish, grinning diamond, peregrine falcons, and gulls. Perhaps this is all that can be found on a short trip to the Anabar Plateau, not counting the most beautiful views, except for the unexplained phenomena. The Anabar Plateau is a unique place in Russia. The history of the Russian exploration of the Thymir expanses, the North Siberian lowland, and the Middle Siberian plateaus began at the end of the first or at the beginning of the second decade of the 17th century. But there were people or other sentient beings here way before. In accessible places of the plateau, you can stumble upon ancient ruins with megalithic masonry foundations, the blocks of which overlap each other, and they partially preserve the remains of carvings almost erased by time. All this and much more is still waiting for its researchers, real researchers, not tourists. The Anabar Plateau is securely hidden from the outside world. This is one of the wildest places on the planet. There are mountains scattered across the vast expanse, suspiciously resembling the ruins of ancient temples. Rare photographs of the Anabar Plateau amaze the imagination and raise many questions. Take a look at these photos. Scientists believe that these are only natural formations. However, most of it looks like a destroyed and scorched city with the remains of buildings. The Khotuikan River originates on the Anabar Plateau. On the banks of the Khotuikan and other rivers, there are simply fantastic-looking rocks. On the plateau, the mountain surfaces have a mostly smooth landscape. There are no severe, sharp elevations. It's clear that glaciers have worked through here in the past, and only where the rivers cut a canyon for themselves, bizarre rocks are exposed. Many kilometers of stone stretch along the coast, among which sharp rocks like peaks soar into the air, resembling medieval cities built up with stone in the Gothic style. Of course, according to the official scientific theory, these bizarre columns of the ancient Acropolis are the result of the work of water, the frost, sun, wind, and so on. As well as everywhere else, however, there's always at the adamant party line. Scientists are forbidden to think about ancient civilizations, but no one will forbid everyone else. People can think for themselves. In general, there are accounts that there were a certain number of previous civilizations on our planet before our civilization came to be. For example, the Tibetan Lamas believe that ours is the 23rd civilization in a row. There are hypotheses that so-called guests also arrived from outer space, from China to Central Asia to Georgia to Armenia and other parts of the world. Some of them diligently fought each other with different types of weapons. In addition, various cataclysms periodically occurred on Earth. For example, the tilt of the axis changed, causing floods, earthquakes, and so on. Therefore, civilizations eventually perished, leaving only ruins behind. For several centuries, researchers and adventurers have been looking for traces of ancient civilizations, And in Africa too, there are researchers actively seeking evidence. Some are also found in the Amazon jungle, the caves of Tibet, the pyramids of Egypt. So those who look for ancient civilizations rarely, if ever, are interested in northern Siberia and the shelf of the Arctic Ocean, and yet those places keep the answers to many secrets of the past. For example, Putaran Plateau is a huge mountainous country in the north of the Krasnoyarsk territory. Its territory is comparable in size to the United Kingdom and is located east of the Yenisei River Valley, southwest of the Anabar Plateau, north of the Severman-Tangauskas Plateaus, and south of the North Siberian lowland. The plateau was once actively developed by more advanced civilizations. This is evidenced by numerous finds, information about which sometimes becomes public. There's masonry, the remains of colonnades, processed megalithic blocks, remains of statues, man-made caves, and much more. And of course, there are structures that look like pyramids, ruins of ancient buildings, and other traces of ancient civilizations are found. Not only in many valleys of the plateau, but there are many structures on its flat peaks stretching over vast expanses. Nowadays, they're sometimes covered with thick vegetation, and huge areas represent lifeless stone rock wastelands. Apparently, the active development of these places by people took place when it was warmer. The surface of the plateau was covered with forests, and to determine the time affiliation of all of these finds and to find out who these unknown builders were is a matter for the future. In the meantime, official science ignores all of these structures, but maybe it's for the best. Our civilization is not ready for some people. That's their opinion, to gain access to the secrets of ancient peoples, and therefore they should remain so until the right time comes. There is the so-called Shaitan or Devil Mountain that has always been considered by the local population as a place of great power. The Ave Inc., a local people, have shamans that lived and performed ceremonies at its base. Various rituals were held next to it. It was under its slopes, according to the stories of the old-timers in the 1930s and 40s of the 20th century, that the Ave Inc. of this area lived out her life on a plateau above the Shaitan Mountain. Ruins of ancient megalithic structures are on top, with the remains of carvings to be found in the mountainside, and in clear weather you can see the face of Shaitan, actually a human face in a huge semi-profile. It's possible that this is a game of nature, but it looks too much like an energetically powerful face that has been revered since ancient times, right up to a few years ago. After another collapse, a tunnel opened on the mountainside that led deep into the mountain, but later, when trying to get inside, another internal collapse filled up the passage, although the contours of the hole are still clearly visible. Then there are the legendary pyramids of Putaran. These are triangular in shape and are large in size, about 450 to 500 meters high, and one of the smallest is about 200 meters. The absence of terraces charismatic of Putaran is unusual in these places. People observe very unusual phenomena during Christmas. Almost every evening in one of the frozen 100-meter waterfalls, rotating concentric circles rise from the ground into the sky, forming a giant luminous spiral. The phenomenon exists for no more than 15 minutes, after which the spiral fades and dissolves into the dark. According to the legend preserved by many generations of the indigenous inhabitants of northern Siberia and local spiritual leaders, who are usually disparagingly called shamans and healers, intelligent life has existed on our planet for many hundreds of thousands of years. In ancient times, there were powerful civilizations, some of which perished due to disasters. About 40,000 years ago, one of these world wars took place on Earth between the states located on two continents. Today, they are known as the legendary Hyperborea and Atlantis. The use of some super-powerful weapons led to huge destruction, geological and climatic changes. People belonging to the two branches of the single super-ethnicity were forced to look for new habitats. The Indo-Europeans from Atlantis and from Hyperborea had to explore the expanses of other continents, so the Indo-Europeans found themselves in North Africa, America, near Asia, in the Urals, in Siberia, including the Putaran Plateau. But Atlantis, having decreased in size, was preserved only on a relatively small island in the Western Ocean. Meanwhile, the confrontation continued. Its culmination was the fall of a giant cosmic body, celestial body, 12,000 years ago in the area of the modern Atlantic. A new global catastrophe, the rise of the waters of the world ocean rose by more than 100 meters. The ancients who managed to foresee the natural cataclysm, as the legend says, even before the events began, built special stone structures, special storages, and entire underground cities deep underground on the Putaran Plateau, where they hid everything most important to their civilization. Cultural values, some artifacts testifying to their origins from outer space, and the knowledge about previous terrestrial civilizations. This Siberian legend is similar, by the way, to the Buddhist myth about the departure of an entire people underground in the north of Siberia. In connection with the legends about the secrets of Putaran and their secret keepers, we can mention a strange fact in the biography of Joseph Jugashvili, the Soviet dictator better known as Joseph Stalin. Despite his tendency to escape for some reason, he conscientiously served exile in the foothills of the Putaran Plateau from 1914 to 1917. He was in the so-called Ruhanskar exile. At the same time, he himself chose Koyaka as the place to serve his sentence. This was, of course, under the old Russian Empire. Alone, according to the Russian researcher George Sidaroth, Stalin disappeared for months into the foothills of Putaran and on the other tributaries of the Yenisei River. No one knows what he did there, and the leader preferred not to share with anyone about this period of his reclusive life. This was a very interesting period of his life which we don't know anything about, and in the most interesting place. In northern Siberia, there are also legends about the Golden Woman associated with the secrets of the same Putaran Plateau and the local spiritual leaders. Many traditions of the northern peoples are connected with the Putaran Plateau that say somewhere here the legendary Golden Woman is hidden. This was an idol made of gold, a pagan shrine of the Siberians that was hunted by various researchers and adventurers and the Ave Inks Guard, according to legend. In the epic of the northern peoples, many legends related to the Putaran Plateau have been preserved. The country of eternal darkness and death was often called Putaran by the inhabitants of the tundra, the Ninets-Dolgans and Ganasans. They very rarely came here without extreme need to be here, and only the Ave Inks actually mastered almost the entire area of the plateau. They had been the keepers of the secrets of Putaran. For the past centuries, the study of the Putaran Plateau began only in the 1940s, 50s of the 20th century, maybe a little bit earlier. Until then, even maps of this area didn't exist. Lama, for example, appeared on maps in the late 1930s of the 20th century. A few expeditions passed through, and after a short time they left, leaving the plateau alone, and there have never been any permanent settlements of the mainland people in this area. By the way, Russian ufologists consider Putaran as a kind of Mecca. They are assured that in this land, as nowhere else, there are direct communications with unearthly forces available. In confirmation of their correct assumptions, they usually point to the round pits, which are found in large numbers in the plateau. They can be found on the banks of the river, and the locals say there are places where nothing grows, where there are no traces of animals, very bad places, and they bypass such anomalies they do not travel there. Scientists who have seen these basins or round pits only spread their hands around, meaning they're not sure about them, and of course expressing various assumptions. One of the long-time researchers of the mysteries of the Putaran Plateau is Valentin Salamchikov. He's a Russian science candidate of physical and mathematical sciences, an expert in ufology and anomalous phenomena. During one of his expeditions to the plateau, he met with an unusual phenomenon, and here is his report. Our equipment cannot be kept in a tent. Diesel is always rumbling nearby to power the equipment. We look out of our trailer only when the devices begin to show all sorts of devilry. Suddenly there's an aurora or a borealis, or even rarer, red haze outside. The scientist recalls the circumstances of his unexpected contact with the unknown. I did not expect to see anything interesting when the equipment went haywire. I got out of my house, which sadly stood on a deserted Siberian plateau 40 kilometers from the only nearest human habitation, a weather station. It was already dark. A misty haze began to rise from a small lowland. The breeze carried the fog in my direction, and soon the red beacon that I lit and the mast of the wind generator was no longer visible from the air. I returned to the house for a flare gun, and I found that the recorder was doing something strange. It had some interference, and when I got out again, I saw an unusual sight in the approaching fog wall. A chain of dull red spheres, one after another, emerging from the fog and then disappearing into it. It was as if the spheres were on some huge invisible disk, because this strange dance did not think to stop, and several dozen spheres had already passed or floated before my eyes. I had to go back to the house for binoculars, and by this time the spheres had significantly dimmed, completely being in a foggy haze. So I didn't see any details. It even gave the impression that it was the fog that extinguished this light. Finally, the phenomenon ended. I timed it, and it turned out that the electromagnetic interference also ended about the same time. However, their nature remained unclear, whether they were generated by the spheres themselves or some tectonic process that gave rise to them. According to Salamchikov, for a long time he didn't encounter anything similar to this phenomenon in the literature devoted to paranormal phenomena, although pilots at altitude have repeatedly encountered garlands of fireballs. There's no rational scientific explanation for such phenomena, there is only the mystical. For example, witnesses in another Russian area claim that they sometimes saw a glowing human figure next to the spheres, and Castrauma children were once brought home by such a fireball or a sphere, unanimously claimed that they were led out of the forest by a glowing woman with a burning lamp. Alas, none of the adults saw this woman, but it's well known that young children often see ghosts, apparitions, and phantoms of dead people. There is no other explanation for the behavior of the luminous spheres. As yet, according to Salamchikov, however, the UFO garlands have been sighted in Kazakhstan, as well as strange spheres reported not far from the Khatanga in 1970s, but that's not far from these two plateaus. Any attempt to land on the way on the Anabar Plateau is only by helicopter. Geologists who come here to study rocks created a geochronological scale of rocks of 5 billion years, from the Cryptozoic to the Cenozoic era. The age of the rocks allows us to study the geographical history of the Earth. Geologically, the Anabar Plateau is unique. The Anabar Shield, which geographically coincides with the Anabar Plateau, is built by the so-called Precambrian rocks. Here, some of the most geologically ancient rocks come to the surface, Proterozoic and Archean having the age of 1.6 to 2 billion years old respectively. From 3 to 5 billion years, the history of the formation of these rocks is described by geologists as follows. For millions of years, the Siberian platform drifted from the southern hemisphere of the Earth to its current position in the northern hemisphere. A warm ocean splashed over it for a long time, in which sea sediments of different geological eras or epochs accumulated. As a result of the rise of the ocean floor, the most ancient sedimentary rocks appeared on the surface precisely in the area of the Anabar Plateau. The Kotukan River has cut its valley in these rocks for millions of years and created one of the most majestic landscapes on Earth. The river has exposed geological layers to which you can read the history of the Earth and, like a time machine, get access to billions of years in the past. There are giant craters in the Russian north, just like those all over the Earth, caused by either falling meteorites or from nuclear bombs from the past that we don't know anything about. On the Anabar Plateau near the Popigai River, there's the Popigai crater with a diameter of 100 kilometers. Of course, it's impossible to see the crater even from a helicopter, but the bottom of the crater is 200 meters below the surrounding area. The edges are eroded, and geologists suggest that about 35 million years ago, a celestial body about 6 to 8 kilometers in diameter crashed there. The industrial diamonds left behind as a result of the powerful impact were a state secret in the USSR and modern Russia. In the 1970s and 1990s of the 20th century, quite a lot of tourist groups were brought to the Putaran Plateau every year. There were many hunting and fishing places for them to seek, but due to the constant increase in tariffs for helicopters, the only transport available to the vast majority of the plateau, the flow of tourists has sharply decreased. Fishing points have been abandoned, and a huge part of the plateau has become completely deserted. Many valleys have not been visited by people for centuries. The Putaran Plateau is one of the very few completely underdeveloped and almost deserted places on our planet, and the plateau is indeed a difficult place to reach. But not wanting to exaggerate, it is much more difficult and expensive to get there, for example, to the center of the Taimyr Peninsula or some point of the mainland Arctic. But of course, most of them are closed to foreigners because of the strategically important military installations and facilities, and there are simply no regular tours for tourists there. But in other places of the Arctic, there are many of them. On the Putaran Plateau, access is only granted to the western part, the protected zone of the Putaran Reserve, so much for the inaccessibility. Tour operators do their best to explore the aura of mystery and inaccessibility of the Putaran Plateau, selling tours to a couple of well-known, well-maintained bases in the western part of the plateau. The remoteness from civilization, the pristine nature of the plateau, and some marketing do the job, and they bring tourists. There are a huge number of waterfalls on the plateau. The most interesting ones are located deep inside the reserve and are accessible to comfort lovers only by helicopter. This dramatically reduces the anthropogenic load or human impact on the area. Fortunately, the Putaran Reserve occupies a significant part of the Putaran Plateau. Entry is prohibited there without a permit, but the protected area of the nature reserve is open for visiting. Even though it's not as strict as the main territory, such a visit must be coordinated. It's remarkable that there is no infrastructure for tourists on the central part of the plateau. All programs and development plans relate only to the protected area of the reserve in the western part of the plateau, accessible by rivers and lakes from Norilsk. For foreigners, it's almost impossible to get into Norilsk. Sadly, tourism everywhere shows that mass tourism is harmful to nature. The Putaran Plateau has many lakes, rivers and canyons. It has the largest number of waterfalls in Russia. Putaran lakes are mostly isolated from the outside world, and the fish in each of them differs from the fish of neighboring reservoirs. Now, just imagine what else the plateaus hide and what could be located in the halls of the inaccessible lands. Maybe we'll find out one day if there's a concentrated research effort by those who keep their minds open and by scientists who want to get to the bottom of the mystery. The Great Arctic Nature Reserve, the largest in Russia and in Eurasia, was established in 1993. Its shores are washed by two seas of the Arctic Ocean, the Kara Sea and the Laptev Sea. The Putaran Nature Reserve was established in 1988. It's also one of the largest in Russia and is in the Arctic, in the middle part of the large mountainous country. The fabulous Putaran Plateau was by the time a nature reserve, whose entire territory was in the zone of continuous permafrost, became established in 1979. Those are very interesting areas and part of Russian history, of course. But before there was Russia, or even a hint of Russia, hundreds of thousands of years ago, maybe more, there were definitely civilizations in the north of the country, of which supporting research identifies areas in the Urals and also strange artifacts. Today we're talking about the Barents Sea, a very interesting part of Arctica. The Barents Sea borders with northern Europe, and it sweeps the coast of Russia and Norway, as well as the archipelagos Spitsbergen, Franz Josef, and the land Novaya Zemlya. The peculiarity of the Barents Sea is created by its numerous islands, its rugged shorelines, the various capes, fjords, groves and bays, and also the strange discoveries at the bottom of the sea itself. Based on all research available to the public, we still really know very little about the sea. Even the Russians and Norwegians know very little, but they seem to be most interested in the well-being of this body of water. 2 Russian submarines sadly perished in the Barents Sea in fairly recent times. There was the Kursk and then the most mysterious Losharik. The second submarine, the Losharik, was opening on a very special secret mission, and a number of top Russian naval specialists perished in that disaster. It has been suggested that part of its mission was to possibly study some very unusual phenomena at the bottom of the Barents Sea. The Barents Sea is relatively shallow, with an average depth being 222 meters or 728 feet, and its maximum level reaching only 600 meters, which is about 1968 feet. In the Middle Ages, the Barents Sea was depicted on geographical maps and international treaties under different names. Throughout its history, it's been called the North Sea, the Mormon Sea, the Kavyasko Sea, the Arctic Sea, and even the Moscow Sea. The Russian name Barents Sea was in honor of the famous navigator and traveler who died there. He was ultimately adopted by the Soviets in the Soviet Union era. The Barents Sea belongs to the Arctic seas, and there is only one which remains ice-free. The sea is greatly influenced by the warm waters of the Gulf Stream, and as a result of this, its southern and western parts, which comprise a quarter of the total sea surface, do not freeze over. This warm stream prevents the formation of old ice. Only the northern part of the sea is covered with old floes and contains detached icebergs. In 1993, Russian geologists discovered an iridium anomaly. Later, their Norwegian colleagues proved that this anomaly had appeared as a result of a huge asteroid, which was 2 kilometers or 1.2 miles in diameter. This asteroid fell into the Barents Sea more than 140 million years ago, and its explosion and tsunami it caused was so devastating that marks left by the meteorite are still evident on the surface of the distant territories of modern France. In modern times, heavy metals and organic contaminants of man-made origin have been observed in both sediments and organisms at different traffic levels. In recent years, there has been some public concern both in Norway and Russia over the possibility of radioactive pollution. Nuclear power plants, nuclear vessels, and nuclear weapons are present in the area, and they produce radioactive waste. Reports of this waste have influenced public opinions in many countries. There have also been many stories of UFO sightings over the Barents Sea. Russian sources speak about symbols, and although most of it is Norwegian in origin, it's very hard to find any confirmation on these symbols phenomena. Cartographers from the Norwegian Institute of Marine Research have discovered strange shapes at the bottom of the Barents Sea. This figure 9 here, for example, was found at a depth of 250 meters in the northwest of the province of Finnmark. It measures about 1,000 meters across. The depth of the symbol or numbers track at 8 meters. According to Hanna Hug Nestal, the project manager of Marineo, they saw many different drawings or tracks in the seabed in the shape of hearts and drawings resembling animal figures, huge arrows, and traces of what looked like tram wheels. The Marineo mapping records the depth and topography, the sediment composition, the biodiversity habitats, and the biotypes and the levels of pollution of the seabed in the Norwegian coastline and offshore regions. Marineo is coordinated by the Institute of Marine Research in collaboration with the Geological Survey of Norway and their Norwegian Hydrographic Service. The first hypothesis of these researchers about the appearance of these strange symbols was that they were thought that they were traces of trawls from fishing vessels, but it was quickly discarded as trawlers do not at all particularly leave traces visible to the radar on the bottom of the sea, and they cannot be compared with what is there in size. So they came to the conclusion that these numerous lines were left by icebergs, many of which on the lower underwater parts may have had pointed edges or even a single point. Theoretically, they would be capable of leaving such a trace. However, in addition to the indented lines, there are also convex or raised lines, as you can see in one of the photos. These raised areas are more than 170 meters wide and 6 meters high, and it's not yet clear what kind of icebergs could have left them. Apparently at the bottom of the Barents Sea, you can see that there are more of these impressive footprints visible on the Google Earth maps. The length of these lines is about 800 kilometers, and they are 1 to 2 kilometers wide. We don't have the answer as to who or what left them. The Barents Sea is located within the continental shoal, but unlike other similar seas, most of it has a depth of 300 to 400 meters, an average depth of 220 meters, and a maximum of 600 meters. The story of giant underwater craters found at the bottom of the Barents Sea will possibly help solve the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. According to some scientists, the Norwegian Arctic University reports that the objects found down there are located off the coast of Norway at about a 45-meter depth. These giant craters reach 800 meters. Geologists believe that these craters were formed as a result of large gas bursts. In their opinion, the release of methane provokes powerful underwater explosions called undex. These explosions melt ice and underground deposits, creating gas which bursts violently to the surface. At the same time, its volume increases by 150 times, the water temperature rises significantly, and dangerous vortices are born in the atmosphere. This process is very dangerous for ships and aircraft, which can crash due to pneumo collapse. The authors of the study believe that this theory can explain the phenomenon of the Bermuda Triangle, in which 100 ships have mysteriously disappeared over the past century. For confirmation of this, however, it's necessary to find similar craters on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean in the areas bounded by Bermuda, Puerto Rico, and Florida. Such an expedition is not planned for the foreseeable future yet, however, and scientists intend to concentrate on studying the craters of the Barents Sea for now. Keep in mind, as was mentioned before, there were Soviet submarines on secret missions, or maybe they were not so secret to the Americans. They also found things around the Yucatan Peninsula and the Caribbean Sea, and there is still information coming to light about the strange carvings or tracks underwater that were discovered in Bermuda, Florida, and Puerto Rico, as there are, of course, American submarines researching and operating there. Let's go further back in time, when part of the ancient supercontinent, or Pangaea, is still hidden under the Barents Sea. Pangaea, or Pangaea, was a supercontinent that existed during the late Paleozoic and early Mesozoic eras. It's assembled from earlier continental units approximately 335 million years ago and began to break apart 175 million years ago. In contrast to the present Earth and its distribution of continental mass, Pangaea was centered on the equator and surrounded by the superocean Panthalassa. Pangaea is the most recent supercontinent to have existed and the first to be reconstructed by geologists. The discovery was made by Norwegian scientists after studying the results of seismic studies and data obtained after drilling wells. They restored a picture of rocks and sediments that formed over millions of years. According to New Scientist, it turned out that in the era of the dinosaurs, the largest river delta in the history of the planet was located on the site of the sea. It was 10 times the size of the Amazon Delta. The delta existed 227 to 237 million years ago during the Triassic period. Its area covered the entire modern Barents Sea, and it was 1.65 square kilometers, or 1% of the total land area. Deltas are formed when a river carries sediment downstream and then dumps it on the coast. These deposits eventually form fertile plains for plants and animals. The ancient delta was located on the northern coast of Pangaea. It was fed by numerous streams that arose due to monsoon rains and flowed to the shore from the mountain ranges located to the south. Scientists have not yet been able to determine what kind of animals lived in that place, but it can be assumed that amphibians thrive there and labyrinthodonts, which would have chosen a wetland environment. Vegetation included many ferns and sparse coniferous trees, and the coastal waters were inhabited by pelycosaurs and ichthyosaurs. Most of the rest of Pangaea was much less hospitable, as the area of the equator there were dry and hot deserts, so the delta would have been almost the only cradle of life. It has been steadily expanding for 2 to 5 million years. it can be concluded that the sea level remained relatively stable. This corresponds to the early theory that in the Triassic period there was a stable greenhouse climate with no ice caps at the poles. Earlier, it was reported that traces of the ancient supercontinent were found under the waters of the Indian Ocean. There is a huge importance in relation to the Arctic for Russia. You hear a lot in the news about Russia becoming more militarized, and of course the West is looking to restrain it, or vice versa. During Soviet times, there were very unusual fortifications created or built, as if in some kind of preparation for something big. It's speculated that Russia's wealth will grow exponentially, not only in Siberia, but also in the Arctic. This is a very important territory for Russia, and according to many estimates, almost a quarter of the planet's hydrocarbons are concentrated there. This assumption is corroborated by the fact that there used to be warm seas, tropical greenery, and moist forest, because without this, there's no coal, oil, or gas. Also, the legends of Hyperborea and Arctida are well-founded according to a number of researchers, and on ancient maps, Greenland, Svalbard, Franz Josef Land, and Novaya Zemlya formed an arc. Inside this was the location of the current Barents Sea. It was probably still warm at the time. Maybe an ancient civilization existed in those mysterious lands, and the remaining evidence of these civilizations are the caves, mines, stones, shrines, and pyramids. Rumors of possible conflict between the United States and Russia seem to be overblown according to some researchers, and they believe that the challenge presented to these countries by numerous UFOs, USOs, and other possible phenomena in the cold water of the Arctic seas should certainly be more of a priority. In many places of our planet, there are mysterious creations formed by human hands, such as mazes and labyrinths. Since the Paleolithic age, mazes and spirals have been known to man. Ancient sun worshippers left us their images on stones and mammoth tusks, and later this form was repeated in temple rings, in ancient Russian embroidery, and in ritual dances. Today, we'll look at a very strange labyrinth in Russia. Velisovka is a village in the Gribanovetsky district of Voronezh region, 142 kilometers southeast from the city of Tambov, 600 kilometers south of Moscow. It's part of the Bolsha-Alabuska settlement and was founded in the middle of the 18th century by the presence of Ukrainian origin, settled in the area by Count Warren Soff. Velisovka is a small village, but for the local places in the area, it can be said that it is a strategically located village. If you look for information on the Velisovka Labyrinth on the Russian internet sites, you'll get very sensational results. Secrets of dwarfs from the labyrinth and legends of sorcerers, slayers, and magicians, along with mysterious and nasty tiny humanoids. There is also a skull with evidence of trepanation of a triangular shape. Trepanation refers to an ancient surgical intervention in which a hole is drilled or scraped into the human skull. There are also stories about dangerous Soviet archaeologists waiting at the excavations and reluctant locals who warned against disturbing local mounds. There were breakdowns of equipment and the decapitated head of a horse that was left at the camp of some of the archaeologists. Some of them finally fled the area in fear, but others died under mysterious circumstances. Also added to the mix was the story of the Soviet military pilot who was shot over Mongolia in August of 1945. The pilot was actually from the same general area as the Velisovka Labyrinth. He survived, but was imprisoned by humanoid creatures no taller than 45 centimeters. When he finally escaped back to the world as we know it, X-rays were taken of the pilot that showed he had a triangular aperture in his skull, the same shape as the skull discovered in the Velisovka Labyrinth. Well, such internet tales are basically hoaxes, fake stories surrounding a very unusual discovery made by Soviet archaeologists, and the research continued for some years. It's not just to create money for the Russian tabloids when stories like that are published. According to the archaeologists, these stories come from malicious intent, with the objective being to obfuscate the find and maybe to keep away any curious members of the population. Unfortunately for Russia, the area had been and still is being targeted by the so-called outlaw archaeologists. These Chornyik archaeologists, as they're referred to in Russian, raided the mounds or kurgan, stole the contents, and later sold them to private collectors. Understandably, there's a question about the lost expedition of the Nikolai Proharov and Irina Piskarova, if they ever existed, or more precisely, what if some group that were interested in the labyrinth for whatever reasons acted under their own names? It seems there are never easy cases from Russia, but it's possible that this was a complicated hoax to steer genuine archaeologists and others away. So let us look closely at the Velisovka discoveries and mysteries. One of the people who helped to reveal the facts was researcher of historical sciences, associate professor of the Department of Russian History of Voronezh State Pedagogical University, Valery Beryzutsky. He wrote articles about the discovery back in 1991 in the Soviet Archaeological magazine, issue number 3. Then after the hoax became disseminated in a local newspaper, he also published an article and was interviewed by a major Russian newspaper. Looking at other sources, it was unveiled that it was Beryzutsky who organized and participated in the excavation of mounds near the village of Velisovka from 1985 to 1996, along with students of the archaeological expedition of the Pedagogical University. An underground labyrinth was discovered by Voronezh archaeologists in the 1980s. The findings of the Voronezh researchers in the barrows or molds or kurgans near Velisovka are really unique. So far, the first excavations in 1985 revealed evidence of the Bronze Age from the 3rd to 2nd millennia BC. On one of the Velisovka mounds, they encountered an ancient ritual belonging to the tribes who lived in the Bronze Age. The structures of the graves of the creators were tightly clogged up with clay, and as usual it was sheer chance that helped them discover these structures and explore them. At the bottom of the grave pit, there were indeed the skeletons of buried people. Other amazing finds were also made there: a flute which was made from the tubular bones of a large bird, intricately decorated clay vessels, and bone ornaments. About 20 mounds were studied. Unique data was obtained about the Bronze Age, nomads of the Roman Empire, Sarmat, and the nomads of the Golden Horde era of the 13th and 14th century when the Mongols invaded Europe. In 1988, during the excavation of one of the mounds, the archaeologists found a large grave site measuring somewhere around 8 by 8 meters. The find promised something out of the ordinary. In addition to the find, scattered throughout the embankment were fragments of Crimean amphoria and traces of wakes for the deceased. As a result, the remains of a complex underground structure were found. In its center was a large square-shaped pit, obviously once designed to install a wooden or stone pillar. Was it for an idol? Several small human bones lay on the floor of the pit, and the shape and structure of the pit resembled a yurt with its domed ceiling. Leading off the pit were numerous narrow, winding passageways which led together to form a labyrinth. Some of the passages were underground and some were open, but the center of the building could only be accessed on all fours. In the passages they found fragments of ancient dishes, Crimean amphora and jugs. There were also sheep bones and several skulls of horses and front limbs. A yurt, or yurta for those who don't know, is a portable round tent covered with skins or felt and is used as a dwelling by several distinct nomadic groups in the steppes of Central Asia. The structure consists of an angled assembly, or latticework of wood or bamboo for walls, the ribs of a door frame, poles, rafters, and a crown wheel compression ring, possibly steam band. One of the horse skulls contained iron rods with pitchings, metal rods inserted into holes for better horse control possibly. The horse-bit shanks allowed the researchers to establish the time of the creation of the labyrinth, which was from the 8th to the 9th century AD. This is the time period of the domination of the tribes of the Khazar Kaganate or Kaganate. Is it possible that the Iranians, Bulgarians, Khazars themselves, or smaller nomadic Turkic groups created the mysterious structure? Or was it created by some other tribe now forgotten? The findings of the archaeologists allowed them to come to this conclusion. In the center of the labyrinth there was evidence of ceremonial actions, the ritual sacrifice of horses, sheep and human beings. After the rites were performed, the creators of the labyrinth completely covered it with earth. The labyrinth is unique. There are no similar ones in Europe or Asia. Russian archaeologists Plitnuov and Vinyikov suggested that the Velisovka Labyrinth may have been the place of initiation into adult age by members of society. They possibly used the labyrinth to initiate the young men and women of the community into adulthood. Judging the findings there, the priests performed various rituals, including sacrifices, although human remnants may have been brought there for other purposes. Tangled passages, according to archaeologists, served for the ritual of initiation into the introduction of a human being to the pagan religion, a kind of trial for young men or women, if you will. The subject, who would have been in complete darkness, had to find his or way to the center of the labyrinth, where the priest would have conducted the rite of initiation. So it looks like the Velisovka Labyrinth has nothing to do with dwarves or inhabitants of Atlantis, but it carries a lot of mysteries concerning the rites that were performed there. To summarize, nothing has really been excavated officially since 1996. The outlaw archaeologists had worked in the area and, of course, appropriated artifacts. They still operate in the Voronezh regional area, probably around Velisovka, looking for more mounds. Back in the 1990s, information surfaced about paranormal phenomena around Lake Baikal, and in particular those of former military Soviet officer Mikhail Steinberg about underwater humanoids sighted by Soviet frogmen in the lake. This was not a lone account. Further investigation turned up other research of strange tall humanoids found in other parts of the Russian Empire and then the USSR. Ever since the 1970s, tales of strange phenomena have been reported near or in water, such as stories that appeared to tell of incidents off the shore of the Black Sea. Later confirmation of these events were published in a book by the late Mikhail Demediko, who was the Chinese interpreter for top Soviet military officials and was later a popular writer and researcher. Lake Baikal is a very interesting place. It possesses a local nickname, the Pearl of Siberia, and is also referred to by many as the Baikal Sea. That's important, and it's the largest freshwater lake in the world. By volume, it contains about 23% of the world's fresh water. It's also the most transparent and clearest water in the world. Its depth is about 5,387 feet, or 1,642 meters, which makes it the world's deepest lake, and it's the 7th largest lake by its surface area. Despite its great depth, Baikal Lake is well mixed and is well oxygenated. It is also the world's oldest lake, about 25 to 30 million years old, and some recent research suggests in about a few million years from now, it will become its own ocean. The majestic lake is surrounded by high mountains and is situated in a rift valley, where the Earth's crust is slowly pulling apart. The rift is active and widens about 2 centimeters or 0.8 of an inch every year. The fault zone is also active with hot springs, and earthquakes happen about 2,000 times a year. The lake is fed by 6 main rivers: the Upper Angara River, the Turka River, the Sarma River, the Salminga River, and the Barguzin River, and also the Snars-Nia River, including many other rivers totaling 330 flowing rivers, and is drained to a single outlet in the Angara River. Of course, we have ancient stories about tunnels that connect this lake with other parts of the world. Lake Baikal hosts more than 2,500 species of animal and more than 1,000 species of plants, of which 80% of plants and animals are endemic and can only be found at Baikal. It also has species that would fall into the realm of cryptozoology, or maybe study of extraterrestrial sentient civilizations, and its depths were apparently no secret to those who wrote the Mahabharata in ancient India. Baikal historians are more than attentive to the story of the failed capture of humanoids in 1982. For example, a well-known local historian, Borotia Alexei Vanyinko, believes that the ill-fated Soviet divers of Frogman could have easily seen something, and they were not seal carcasses. Alexei Vanyinko was one of the founders of the Ethnographic Museum of People of Transbaikalia, and at one time he worked as the director of the State Archive of the Burat Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic. He was a member of the Academic Council of Archivists, or Archivists of Siberia in the Far East, senior researchers of the Baikal Institute of Nature Management, candidate of historical sciences, and a doctoral degree student. He discovered prehistoric ostrich eggs in Boryata, found 500 new ancient monuments, petroglyphs and shrines, found graves of members of the Russian embassy mission Urafat-Zabalovsky, who were killed on Lake Baikal by the Mongols in 1650. He found relics of the local Orthodox church Salamchikovsky, discovered the forgotten grave of the Hungarian poet Chandra Peter Fay in Barbazine, and found many other equally interesting objects, ancient sanctuaries, fortresses and settlements. Is it easy to disbelieve such a person? In his article Traces of Real Extraterrestrial Life in Lake Baikal, he points out that local fishermen took the stories about the silver swimmers seriously. So, for example, the fisherman Nikolai Karyev from the village of Kurtuk, which is 40 kilometers from Slodyanka, told the local historian that in the 1990s, together with his comrades, he fished at the Klugla-Baikalskaya, or Kirkum-Baikal railway area, which stretches from Kurtuk to the port of Baikal. Lake Baikal on this place breaks off to a depth of almost 1,400 meters immediately, abruptly at the shore. If you fall overboard here, you will not escape death. Even in summer, the water's temperature in such places is no higher than 3 degrees. You can't swim to the shore, your heart will stop, and in the middle of the night, huge silvery bodies began to jump up out of the icy depths of the lake as if they were playing. The fishermen were frightened. What if these creatures turned over their motorboat? They would die. After dropping their nets and somehow starting the engine, they retreated to the village and never fished there again. However, from the shore, the local historian was also told about this case by other fishermen who were with Karyev, but out of all the witnesses, somehow Karyev remained alive. It's known that the story of Vanyinko was taken seriously by researchers who studied Lake Baikal in 2008 and 2009 with a deep-sea vehicle, Mir. Vanyinko, who was on that expedition, went down to the Lake Baikal himself, and according to him, it happened in the place where the military divers just collided with the swimmers. However, he says that the encounter did not happen at that time. Mikhail Demedico described a chance discovery. According to Vanyinko, the specialist of the Ministry of Emergency Situations of Russia with whom he spoke. Not only did he take the story of the fishermen seriously, but also confirmed the tragedy in 1982 really took place, and Vanyinko recalled that in that distant year he himself met the military on the lake of the Barbazine Bay. When asked what they were doing, the soldiers answered evasively. They said they studied the depths of the reservoir because scientists and limnologists don't know everything about its underwater life. The words of the local historian were indirectly confirmed by the author of the book Sailors of Lake Baikal by Alexander Kalatilo, who speaks of an unusual surge of interest in Lake Baikal since the 1960s. Geographers and cartographers appeared on the shores of the lake again, and the waters of the lake began to plough, to be visited by multiple research vessels. China is not that far away too, so they had their own strategic and defense interests in the Soviet Union, especially since there was a conflict in 1969 between the Communist China and the Communist USSR. Lake Baikal was of great interest and has tremendous stories and a paranormal history. The local historian admits that there are lots of strange phenomena on the lake. There's a glow from the depths and there are blood-curdling sounds, willows or the wisps of wandering lights, are seen over the water if you pass a couple of nights by the campfire on the shore. Vanyinko saw a UFO hover over the lake 3 times, once from the window of his own dacha country house at the Boyak station. It was a huge white ball on the surface of the lake, and it didn't move or drift. It didn't look like a gas outburst either. The second time was on a warm summer evening in Tango. Something small and black fell from the sky at high speed. It was supposed to fall into the lake, but just before it reached the surface of the water, about a few meters, it abruptly changed its trajectory and flew over the lake. The local historian and about 10 of his companions expected that the object would crash into the fishing boats, but suddenly it disappeared as if it had never been there. While walking along the Kirkham-Baikal Railway, Vanyinko once saw a cigar-shaped object of silver-orange color which flew out from the Tunka Valley and flew over the surface of the lake and retreated to the Hamar Daban Bridge. The local historian defined its dimensions as 200 meters in length and about 50 meters in width. Over the lake, the UFO released 3 spherical objects that flew apart. Later, Vanyinko learned at the same time that the object had been seen over Ulan-Ude. Similar objects have also been seen over Siberia, but go as far back as 1953 and were also reported by the Soviet Naval Counterintelligence over the Western Pacific Ocean in 1979. From the old archives, the local historian found 2 amazing documents. First, he discovered that a similar object had appeared over the lake in 1909. It was seen on the Trans-Baikal Railway. The object was moving towards the lake, but sadly there were no further details. According to the swimmers, Vanyinko found a story from a century ago by Tobolsk peasant Komama Roskov, who reported that his friend was a Baikal-born native, Fecha Tarazana, and said that in Baikal there are pharaohs. One day these pharaohs played such a game that they sank a ship. Then the villagers began to suspect foul play, and they threw a strong dragnet into the lake and pulled about 50 pharaohs to the shore. The pharaohs were just like people. They had hands, all human, and legs, only where the toes are, it was kind of fused, like the tail of a fish. The villagers whipped the pharaohs with rods and threw them into the sea. After this incident, the pharaohs went to another place. In 1976, during the construction of a bomb on the Kalamore main line, a division of 12 patrol boats appeared there. Could it be the divers also trained at the base of this division? They might have come from other regions, but all this is covered in secrecy. For those of you who want to do your own research in the lake, we feel we should issue a few words of warning. The FSB, the Russian Security Service, understands the value of the lake and may not like independent researchers from overseas. There are plenty of other dangers and special units that guard it. Lake Baikal has a lot of different phenomena, such as the hurricane wind, for example, and if you go there without understanding what it's like in that lake, you could easily lose your life. The natives believe that the cause of the destructive Sarma is the revenge of the Baikal spirits, who do not tolerate even the slightest violation of the rules of conduct or behavior. Do not throw anything into the water, and even more so, do not spit, do not light fires on the shore, and do not call Lake Baikal a lake. It's only the sea. That's what you're supposed to call it. People living in the village of Sarma additionally fortify their roofs, tying them to the ground because it doesn't cost the wind anything to tear the roof off, and Sarma can easily scatter boats, overturn and flood barges, and even break large ships on the rocks. The danger of Sarma was mentioned in the 17th century by the famous traveller, diplomat and merchant Everett Ides in his notes about his travels in Siberia. He colourfully described the winter crossing on the Baikal ice. The hurricane force wind was so strong that they blew away all the snow. The surface became so slippery that the horses simply could not move. They constantly fell. It's no coincidence that old-timers shoed horses and oxen with special spikes that could help them stay on the ice. According to Ides, a terrible tragedy can end with a crossing on unshod horses. The horses fall and the wind blows them along with the sledge into the nearest sagebush. It's impossible to keep them in order, so it's not to be lost. There's only one thing left, which is to leave everything and watch the horse, the ledge and the luggage go under the water. Every year, dozens of people disappear on that lake, and search expeditions do not give any results. Once a group of researchers ventured to the bottom of Shayan, and they found out that the lake is connected to Lake Baikal by a network of underground tunnels in which snakes can hide. Fishermen confirm the scientists' guesses. They often hear sounds similar to groans and growls from the depth of the waters. Be very careful. There are here areas of Russia that are fascinating, but either you have to know the local people or you have to make sure that the government does not prevent you from going where you're not supposed to. By all means, visit the lake as a tourist. Don't spoil it as some tourists have been doing. And of course, we hope that it doesn't become contaminated by chemicals, as some irresponsible enterprises have been doing. But don't get involved into research if you don't know what you're doing. There was a brief news item in the local Baikal publication in 2018 which shows the military importance of the area. It read, "The Baikal Search and Rescue Squad at the base in the Irkutsk region there are exercises of diving specialists and doctors. During the training, they had to pass an examination of the Central Diving Commission for admission and work as intended. The training camp brought together diving specialists and doctors from the Russian federal detachments, subjects and invited guests from various organizations, suppliers of diving equipment, scientific organizations, and developers of diving equipment and specialists from Birakia." To plunge into the atmosphere of mystical enigmas and mysteries, one should go to Russia, specifically to the Altai region. It has deservedly acquired the name Cradle of the World. The place from where humanity began its journey is there, in the heart of the Altai Mountains, where the borders of Russia, Kazakhstan, China, and Mongolia meet. Altai, a stunning land of snow-capped mountains, fascinating nomadic tribes, an incredible wilderness with offers of adventure. It is truly one of the most beautiful and pristine regions in all of Russia. The borders of this wild and untamed domain touch the semi-deserts of Mongolia and the vast Kazakh plains. For example, this is the place of the Anabar Plateau, mysterious and still largely unexplored. This is the most remote and isolated part of the Altai Mountains. The plateau lies at the heart of the Eurasian continent, almost equidistant to the four oceans of the world. Home to rare animals such as Argali sheep, the black stork, the steppe eagle, and most elusive of all predators, the snow leopard. Few outsiders ever come to the Anabar Plateau, but there are people who've lived there for generations. The Altai Mountains divide the waters of the great rivers, including the Ob River, which flowed northward to the Arctic, and from those draining into the vast Central Asian interior basin. The name in Turkic, Alatal or Altai means owl, which is gold, and tal, which is mountain. In Mongolian, it's Altai Inuru, which means the mountains of gold. There was a very interesting discovery in the region. It was a cave, small but convenient Denisova Cave, right up to the Altai Mountains. The key to many secrets had been hidden for a very long time. But it was here that anthropologists learned why modern man did not form on the territory of Africa as they had previously believed. Historians have found out when our ancestors first picked up a needle and sewed fur clothing for themselves. Archaeologists have understood why they find artifacts made by different types of archaic people nearby, and recent studies have revealed why the genes of Neanderthal and Denisovans are in the genome of modern humans. Until recently, it was believed that they couldn't have children capable of continuing the race. New secrets were revealed by the latest research of the finds made in the Denisova Cave. The first archaeological excavations in the cave above the Anui River began in the 1980s, and almost immediately it became clear that there were many discoveries waiting, as countless generations of people had lived in comfortable and safe caves in the middle of the Altai Mountains for many millennia, and the powerful sedimentary rock deposits have perfectly preserved the traces of their lives. But it was only in 2008 that the discovery was made, after which the Denisova Cave was compared with, in importance for scientists, to the Egyptian pyramids. So, what has been discovered there? There are no crypts filled with priceless treasures, just a small petrified bone. As it turned out later, it was the phalanx of the little finger of a girl, who at the time of her death was about 7 to 12 years old. The scientific director of the Institute of Archaeology and Iconography of the Siberian branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences handed over fragments to Professor Svante Pääbo, head of the Laboratory for the Study of Human History of the Institute of Evolutionary Anthropology of the Max Planck Society in Leipzig. The remains were examined and the results were simply stunning. Svante Pääbo was not in the laboratory at the time, but when he received a call, he was advised to sit down before listening to the news. Sequencing of the first mitochondrial and then the nuclear DNA showed that no Neanderthal or Homo sapiens were found, but a new ancestral species of the genus Homo, according to Dave Renienko. Genetic analysis proved that the people lived in the Altai were different from both Neanderthals and the ancestors of modern people. A new special branch in human evolution has been named Homo sapiens Altaians. The news about the discovery of a previously unknown species of human fossil has become one of the most sensational in the scientific world. The effect that publications about the decoding of the Altai girl's genome caused among archaeologists and anthropologists can only be compared with the Big Bang. For example, a science magazine ranked the discovery in Altai as the second most important after the discovery of the Higgs boson. Why did the tiny bone from the Denisova Cave attract the attention of the entire scientific community? The fact is that it turned over the existing idea of the evolution of a modern type of man. Everything turned out to be much more complicated than previously thought. The discovery in the Altai has refuted the theory that modern man was formed on a single territory and then spread all over the planet. There were at least 3 focal points from where the Adamic populations of Homo sapiens, and geographically they were removed from each other. The scientist Devanyenko came to a conclusion, and many of his colleagues followed him. The theory proposed by the academians from Siberia was called a polycentric concept of human formation. Scientists had to admit that there were at least 3 and possibly 4 autonomous global centers for the formation of Paleolithic cultures in Africa, Eurasia, and Southeast Asia. Each of them played a role in the formation of both the physical appearance of modern man and his material culture. Soon the Denisova Cave presented another mystery. In the same cultural layers where the remains of the Denisovans had been found, the bones of Neanderthals, the representatives of the so-called Altai population, were also discovered. So it's logical to assume the different types of ancient people who were noticeably different from each other genetically lived for a long time on the same territory and possibly shared the same caves. Now, scientists have to find out who first came to the banks of the Anui River and how long did Denisovans and Neanderthals coexist side by side. To do this, it was necessary to date the remains found, but it wasn't easy to do so. In the following years, it was possible to find the remains of 3 more representatives of the Denisovans, 1 woman and 2 men, but tiny bones and teeth were found in layers that were subsequently mixed with each other. It was extremely problematic to determine the age of the remains from neighboring rocks. The initial dating gave a very wide range, from 170 to 50,000 years ago. Scientists had to look for a new method. Only by the beginning of 2019, an international team of researchers managed to cope with the task. Scientists have studied microcrystals of potassium feldspar found together with tools and human remains from the Denisova Cave. This sedimentary mineral changes under the influence of sunlight, which allows you to determine exactly when it was last on the surface. For optical studies, almost 300,000 individual crystals were collected from more than 100 sites of the cave, and then the age of each of them was established. A comparison of the result of optical and radiocarbon dating of rocks and remains allowed scientists to fairly accurately determine the age of all the cultural layers and therefore the finds that were made in them. As it turned out, the Denisovans settled in the Altai much earlier than the Neanderthals and had lived there for more than 200,000 years. The oldest of the tools found, which they had used, was made at least 287,000 years ago. Neanderthals became neighbors of the Denisovans much later. They lived in the Denisovan Cave between 193,000 and 97,000 years ago, and the first inhabitants of the cave remained in the Altai even after the newcomers had left. The youngest of the Denisovan remains found are more than 50,000 years old. The youngest was a girl whose remains gave rise to the study of the historic of this kind of archaic people. In the scientific community, she's often called Woman X. Recently, another international team of scientists conducted an independent study and received almost the same dates as their colleagues. The approximate period of life of Woman X was determined as 76.2 to 51.6 thousand years ago. Now, scientists are trying to establish the age of the new most valuable find. In 2016, there were no tiny bones or teeth found in the Denisovan Cave, but they did find a whole piece of the skull of a Denisovan, 2 fragments of the left parietal bone that were connected to each other. In March of 2019, paleoanthropologists from the University of Toronto in Canada studied these samples, and after the analysis of mitochondrial DNA, they proved that the fragments were part of the skull of another Denisovan. Nevertheless, the Canadian scientists are glad that researchers have not just got bones or teeth, but the first confirmed fragment of the skull of a Denisovan man. Perhaps someday it'll be possible to restore the appearance of the Denisovan it belonged to. We're always greedy and want more, according to the Canadian scientists. They do not intend to give up. They're sure they'll find a way to solve the problem. It's increasingly important to date each of the Altai finds because so far it's not been possible to find the remains of this type of people anywhere else in the world except the Denisovan Cave. After the finds in the Altai, it forced science to reconsider the idea of the evolution of modern man. No one expected the Denisovan Cave could present an even more sensational surprise. However, it did manage to surprise everyone again. In 2016, a tiny fragment of the fossilized remains of another girl was discovered there. It is so small that it's difficult to determine its exact place in the skeleton. However, it was possible to extract enough bone material from the find for DNA analysis. Genome sequencing was again performed in the laboratory of Swante Babo, and again the results were so sensational that some of the best paleogenetic experts in the world did not believe themselves at first. Scientists carefully checked everything again. They made sure that the samples were received cleanly. Such versions as mixing of the materials in the laboratory's analytical equipment and even the consequence of cannibalism was excluded. The scientists had to admit that the error was indeed excluded. The girl whose remains were found in the Altai was more than 13 years old at the time of her death. As recent studies have shown, she lived in the Denisovan Cave from the period from 118,000 to 79,000 years ago. But most importantly, the teenage girl turned out to be a descendant from a mixed marriage, which was previously considered either impossible at all or unproductive. Her father was a Denisovan man, and her mother was a woman from among the Altai Neanderthals. Moreover, the girl's parents were also not purebred representatives of their species. So her father, who was a Denisovan, had at least one Neanderthal ancestor, but genetically, hybridization with these species had occurred from about 300 to 600 generations before his own birth. If we assume the length of the generational change in the Paleolithic time was about 25 years, then the crossbreeding of the ancestors of the girl's father would have happened about 7.5 to 10,000 years before the birth. The traces of previous crossbreeding were preserved in the genetic material of the Neanderthal mother. At the same time, the girl's maternal ancestors came to the Altai relatively recently, about 20,000 years before her birth. Genetic analysis has proved their kinship with the Neanderthal inhabitants of the Vindia Cave in Croatia. Before that, no traces of a group of Neanderthals, who were relatively recent immigrants from Europe, were found in the Altai. The decoding of the genome of the teenage girl from the Denisovan Cave proved that she was a hybrid of a Denisovan and a Neanderthal in the 4th generation, with 1.2% of the girl's DNA fragments corresponding to that of a modern person, 38.6% to Neanderthal, and 43.3% to Denisovan. It's too far-fetched to assume that the remains of the only descendant of a mixed marriage between a Denisovan and a Neanderthal fall into the hands of the scientists by chance, so we have to believe in another hypothesis. Populations of human subspecies did not just live at the same time, they met and mixed, and the fact that the scientists were able to find the first direct descendant of 2 extinct species suggests that such unions were quite common. It's known that the descendants of different species are not capable of further reproduction if they're sterile, for example. If you were to cross a mare and a donkey, then the mule offspring would not be able to continue their kind. Previously, scientists assumed that the different types of archaic people could not have a common offspring that would be capable of reproduction. But since there are traces of repeated crossbreeding in the girl's genome, it should be recognized that despite all the cultural and genetic differences, Denisovans and Neanderthals belong to the same biological species. If the brown-eyed, dark-haired half-breed girl had not died in adolescence and instead had grown up and married any of the men who lived in the Denisovan Cave, she herself could have given birth to a child. As recent studies have shown, traces of the mixing of Neanderthals and Denisovans can be traced to the genome of some of our contemporaries. Swante Pabo stated that in certain groups of modern people, from 1.5 to 5% of the genes of the Denisovan man and about 10 to 15% of the genes of Neanderthals can be found. There would even be more of them if different populations of ancient people had met and mixed more often. The habitats of Denisovans and Neanderthals rarely intersected, and Altai was one of the few territories where they lived side by side for centuries and periodically married. Even in Siberia, which scientists consider a kind of frontier of different clan migrations from a central Homo species in Eurasia, such unions were not common. So, Woman X, whose family had no Neanderthal ancestors, lived in the Altai at least 8 millennia later than the daughter of a Denisovan and a Neanderthal. This means that the mixing of species was not a common occurrence, but even so, it's difficult to overestimate the role that the Denisovans played in the formation of a modern anatomical human species. According to scientists, a small part of the genes obtained from the Denisovans allowed the inhabitants of Tibet to better adapt to life at high altitude, and the inhabitants of Greenland to adapt to the cold. So the Denisovan Cave helped to solve another riddle, but after giving answers to some questions, the cave immediately created new ones. For example, who made some of the later artifacts found in the cave? The peculiarity of making objects from the bones of mammoths and other animals indicates that the craftsmen who created them were Denisovans. They were skilled bone carvers and used advanced technology in the Paleolithic era. It was in a Denisovan cave that a bone needle with a slotted hole was found, which was long enough to use to sew fur or animal skins. Studies showed that this needle was made from the bone of a large bird about 50,000 years ago. Before it was found, it was believed that people who first began sewing was about 40,000 years ago in encampments on the territory of modern France. However, the length of ancient needles rarely exceeded 4 centimeters, yet in the Altai, from 10 millennia before, the needles were a length of 7 to 9 centimeters. This is confirmed by the samples of more than a dozen fragments of similar needles in the Denisova Cave. The first diadem from a mammoth tusk was also made here about 45 to 50,000 years ago. Similar hair ornaments are found at other Siberian Paleolithic sites, but their age is much less at 20 to 28,000 years. This suggests that the Denisovans surprised their contemporaries in skill and created their own original culture, which had no equal in the Paleolithic. However, recent dating has shown that some of the artifacts found in the Denisovan cave could not have been made by the Denisovans, as some pendants and bone tips were made in the period ranging from 32 to 48,000 years ago. At that time, completely different people were living in Western Siberia. They were an early form of Homo sapiens. But why did these ancestors of modern man use the same technology as their predecessors, the Denisovans? Genetic memory cannot explain this. This is just one of the puzzles that has to be solved. The main uniqueness of the Denisovan cave is that every year the task of understanding becomes more difficult, not less. The dream of any archaeologist is to uncover how a species came into being, how they lived, what nature surrounded them. Scientists have recreated a picture of the world over the last 300,000 years, but the picture is not really very clear. In addition to the Neanderthals, it seems that the Denisovan man also had contact with some archaic hominin unknown to science. In the genome of Denisovans, scientists found 17% of an extraneous genome. Hominin, by the way, is the name given to the group that consists of modern humans, extinct human species, and all of our immediate ancestors. The question is, who was that archaic hominin?